Who told you that the woman sweeping brass couldn't outshoot every soldier on this range? The question drifted across the firing line so quietly that no one bothered to answer it. It blended with the dry morning wind rolling over the Nevada desert, disappearing beneath the sharp echoes of rifles cracking in measured rhythm. At Fort Hawthorne, another training day had begun long before sunrise. Instructors barked corrections from behind concrete barriers. Recruits adjusted ear protection with nervous hands, and armored trucks rumbled past rows of steel silhouettes waiting to be peppered with fresh rounds. Near the far end of the range, away from the attention of officers and visitors, a woman pushed a heavy magnetic roller across the gravel. Empty brass casings clicked against its metal drum before dropping neatly into the collection bin attached behind it. She moved at an even pace, never rushing, never pausing unnecessarily. Dust clung to her boots, and faint streaks of powder residue marked the sleeves of her faded work shirt. Anyone passing by would have mistaken her for another range maintenance worker assigned to clean up after soldiers finished shooting. Her name was Claire Donovan. Few people on the installation knew it. Fewer still had ever spoken more than a sentence to her. She preferred it that way. Claire reached down, picked up a damaged cartridge that had escaped the roller, and slipped it into a disposal pouch hanging from her belt. Her movements carried the effortless precision of someone who had repeated the same task thousands of times. Every spent casing, every misplaced target stand, every loose sandbag was noticed without conscious effort. Small details mattered. They always had. The firing line grew busier as additional units arrived for qualification exercises. Young soldiers laughed while comparing scores from previous weeks. Some confidently predicted perfect groups before loading their magazines. Others complained about the heat already settling over the valley despite the early hour. Claire listened without appearing to. She heard the uncertainty hidden beneath loud voices. She noticed trembling hands disguised as confidence. She recognized forced smiles from people who wanted desperately to impress someone higher in rank. Years had taught her that a shooting range revealed far more than marksmanship. It exposed discipline, patience, character. A private accidentally dropped his rifle magazine onto the gravel and muttered under his breath. Claire quietly walked over, retrieved it before anyone stepped on it, brushed away the dirt, and handed it back with a polite nod. "Thank you," the young soldier said awkwardly. She answered only with a faint smile before returning to her work. The moment passed unnoticed, exactly as she intended. Across the compound, military police vehicles rolled toward the administration building while technicians hurried to inspect electronic target systems one final time. Word had spread throughout the base before dawn that a four-star general would personally inspect the facility that morning. Officers straightened their uniforms. Non-commissioned officers repeated safety instructions with unusual intensity. Even experienced range personnel seemed more alert than usual. Claire continued gathering brass. The approaching visit changed nothing for her. She finished emptying another collection bin into a storage container and carefully aligned several target frames that had shifted overnight in the wind. Their edges formed a perfectly straight line after only a few subtle adjustments. Without looking up, she sensed engines approaching long before anyone announced their arrival. A convoy had entered the outer gate. Somewhere behind her, boots struck concrete in hurried succession as commanders rushed to receive the distinguished guest. Claire simply reached for another empty casing lying alone beneath a weathered shooting bench, unaware that within the next hour, the most respected marksman in the United States Army would unknowingly ask the quiet woman cleaning his range to teach him how to shoot. Perfection attracts witnesses. Failure attracts silence. The convoy rolled onto the training grounds with the measured confidence of an institution that had rehearsed authority for generations. Black SUVs advanced in perfect spacing, escorted by military police. Motorcycles whose flashing lights reflected across rows of polished rifles resting on the firing benches. Every conversation faded before the engines even stopped. Boots shifted into formation. Backs straightened instinctively. Officers who had spent entire careers commanding battalions suddenly found themselves checking the alignment of their own collars. General Nathaniel Rhodes stepped out first. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, he carried himself with the quiet certainty of someone accustomed to making decisions that reached far beyond the boundaries of a single installation. Decorations covered the left side of his dress uniform. Each ribbon, representing campaigns most younger soldiers had only studied in military history courses. Stories about his marksmanship circulated throughout the army. Some claimed he had once qualified expert using an unfamiliar rifle after receiving only a brief safety orientation. Others insisted he never missed under pressure. Whether exaggerated or not, few questioned his reputation. Colonel Marcus Ellison greeted him with a crisp salute. "Welcome to Fort Hawthorne, sir." "Let's keep the ceremony short," Rhodes replied evenly. "I'm here to observe the training, not the speeches." "Yes, sir." Behind them, senior officers followed with digital tablets, notebooks, and evaluation folders tucked beneath their arms. Every scheduled movement had been rehearsed twice before sunrise. Timelines were memorized. Demonstrations had been selected carefully. Nothing was supposed to appear unprepared. Not far away, Claire Donovan continued stacking empty ammunition containers beside the maintenance shed. No one introduced her. No one acknowledged her presence. A young lieutenant hurried past carrying target data sheets. Without slowing down, he pointed towards several loose cardboard silhouettes. "Those need replacing before the inspection reaches this section." Claire answered with a simple nod. By the time the lieutenant returned 3 minutes later, every damaged target had already been exchanged, measured, and secured against the mounting brackets with identical spacing between each lane. He barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on the approaching delegation. General Rhodes walked slowly along the firing positions, occasionally stopping to ask direct questions. "Qualification percentages?" 94% this quarter, sir." "Weapon maintenance compliance?" 100%. "Medical response time?" "Under 4 minutes." Each answer came instantly, polished by preparation and expectation. The inspection reached the primary precision lane, where a specially prepared rifle rested on a padded stand beneath a shaded canopy. Nearby cameras had been positioned to document the demonstration for instructional archives. Soldiers gathered behind the observation line, whispering quietly among themselves. "He's going to shoot today. I heard he still groups inside 1 inch." My drill sergeant said watching him is like seeing a machine. Claire carried another container of recovered brass toward the storage rack. She never looked at the spectators. Instead, her attention settled briefly on the rifle arranged for the general's demonstration. The optics sat perfectly level. The bipod was locked correctly. Ammunition boxes remained sealed. Nothing appeared mechanically wrong. She continued walking. General Rhodes removed his service cap and accepted hearing protection from an aide. "This rifle was zeroed yesterday, sir," Colonel Ellison said confidently. "I prefer confirming things myself," Rhodes answered. Several instructors smiled with quiet admiration. Across the lane, Claire paused only long enough to place her collection bin beside a workbench before reaching for a broom leaning against the wall. As she swept the remaining fragments of target backing from the concrete, the first command echoed across the range. "Range is hot." Every eye turned toward the general. Only one pair quietly studied something else entirely. The first miss is a mistake. The second becomes a question. The third changes the atmosphere. The range officer lowered his hand. "Commence fire." General Nathaniel Rhodes settled behind the precision rifle with practiced confidence. Every movement appeared deliberate, refined through decades of military service. He adjusted the stock against his shoulder, relaxed into position, and allowed the crosshair to settle naturally over the center of a target 600 yards away. Around him, nearly 100 soldiers watched without speaking. Some had phones secured inside locked pouches, forbidden from recording. Others leaned forward slightly, eager to witness the legendary accuracy they had heard about throughout their careers. Rhodes inhaled. Half a breath escaped. The trigger broke with almost no visible movement. The rifle thundered across the valley. A heartbeat later, the electronic scoring monitor flashed. 8.6. Silence lingered for only an instant. "Crosswind," one captain murmured quietly. "No concern," another instructor replied. "He'll correct the next shot." No one sounded worried. Not yet. Rhodes studied the display without changing expression. His breathing remained controlled as the spent cartridge spun onto the shooting mat. He reached for another round, chambered it smoothly, and settled back behind the optic. Everything looked identical. His posture, his grip, his timing. The second report echoed against the surrounding hills. Eyes shifted immediately toward the digital screen. 8.4. A faint murmur spread through the observation line. Colonel Ellison folded his arms. That's unusual. One of the senior marksmanship coaches frowned, but remained silent. Nobody standing behind the general possessed the courage to offer advice before being asked. Experience had taught them that unsolicited correction often sounded more like criticism than assistance. Rhodes remained calm. He blinked once, adjusted the magnification ring by a fraction, and inspected the distant target through shimmering desert air. Nothing appeared wrong. The rifle had been zeroed. The ammunition came from the same production lot used during validation. Weather readings remained stable. Even the mirage drifting above the ground suggested only minimal disturbance. He loaded a third cartridge. Across the firing lane, Claire Donovan swept fragments of cardboard from beneath a damaged target stand. The rhythmic motion of the broom never paused, yet her attention drifted naturally toward the firing position. She didn't study the rifle itself. Instead, her gaze settled briefly on the general's upper body, his shoulders, his cheek placement, the pressure along his support arm, the subtle angle of his wrist. Only a few seconds. Then she returned to sweeping. The third shot broke. Another sharp crack rolled across the installation. Every face turned toward the monitor. 8.5. No applause followed. No polite encouragement. Only an uncomfortable stillness settled over the firing line. Several officers exchanged restrained glances before quickly looking away. A young lieutenant opened his notebook, then quietly closed it again without writing anything. Nobody wanted their first observation during the inspection to concern an unexpected performance. General Rhodes slowly removed his finger from the trigger and stared through the optic a little longer than before. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This rifle was confirmed yesterday?" he asked without raising his voice. "Yes, sir." Colonel Ellison answered immediately. "Verified twice." "The ammunition?" "Factory matched, sir." Rhodes nodded once. He accepted the answers, yet something still refused to fit. Behind the maintenance shed, Claire placed the broom against the wall and picked up another container filled with spent brass. As she walked past the observation area, her eyes met the target for less than a second. She already knew the rifle wasn't the problem. She also knew exactly where the missing inches had disappeared. Sometimes the smallest movement is loud enough for an expert to hear. The firing line remained frozen long after the third round struck outside the center ring. No alarms sounded. No equipment malfunctioned. Every instrument reported normal operation. Yet the atmosphere had shifted in a way no electronic display could measure. Soldiers who had arrived expecting another flawless exhibition suddenly found themselves avoiding eye contact with one another. The confidence that had surrounded the general only minutes earlier had dissolved into cautious uncertainty. Nathaniel Rhodes slowly rose from the shooting mat. He removed his protective glasses and studied the rifle in silence. His expression revealed neither frustration nor embarrassment, only concentration. A lifetime in uniform had taught him that blaming equipment before gathering evidence was the fastest path toward poor judgment. "Check the optic," he said calmly. A senior armorer stepped forward immediately. "Yes, sir." Within moments, the rifle rested on a maintenance table. Torque settings were verified. Scope rings were inspected. The chamber was cleared again. Another technician measured the trigger pull weight using a calibrated gauge, while a third confirmed the ammunition matched the issued specifications. Everything passed. Colonel Marcus Ellison watched each inspection with growing confusion. "There has to be an explanation." "There always is," Rhodes answered quietly. Nearby, instructors spoke in voices barely above whispers. "Could the barrel have shifted?" "I doubt it." "What about environmental conditions?" "The wind hasn't changed enough." Each possibility disappeared as quickly as it appeared. Across the range, Claire Donovan emptied another container of recovered brass into a storage drum. Hundreds of polished casings cascaded against the steel walls with a metallic rhythm that blended into the distant sounds of maintenance crews replacing worn target backings. She never looked hurried. She never appeared curious. To everyone watching, she remained exactly what they assumed she was. A woman assigned to clean up after other people finished shooting. Claire lifted a broom and began clearing loose gravel that had collected beside Lane 7. As she worked, her eyes drifted naturally toward the general. Not long enough to attract attention. Only long enough to notice details others overlooked. His support elbow settled differently before each shot. His shoulders remained square. His breathing cycle stayed disciplined. His trigger press looked exceptionally clean. None of those explained the repeated deviation. Then she noticed it again. A subtle inward rotation of the support hand. Barely visible. Almost impossible to detect unless someone had spent years studying precision marksmanship under combat conditions instead of competition settings. It happened only during the final moment before recoil. Less than a second. Enough to redirect the rifle without the shooter realizing it. Claire lowered her gaze. She continued sweeping. Not because she doubted her observation. Because speaking carried consequences. An experienced instructor might accept correction from another instructor. A seasoned commander might tolerate advice from an equal. But a 4-star general receiving technical guidance from someone dressed in maintenance clothing? That was an entirely different matter. Near the firing position, another rifle was brought forward for comparison. General Rhodes accepted it without comment. If the results change, Ellison said, we'll know the issue wasn't the shooter. Rhodes nodded once. Reasonable. Logical. Everyone waited. Claire paused beside a rack of replacement targets and quietly rested both hands on the broom handle. She watched only through her peripheral vision. The general settled behind the second rifle. His posture remained almost identical. So did one nearly invisible habit. Claire closed her eyes for the briefest moment. The next shot would land exactly where the previous 3 had, unless someone interrupted a mistake that no one else had managed to see. The hardest sentence to say in a military career is often the shortest one. Sir, may I? General Nathaniel Rhodes settled behind the second precision rifle with the same disciplined composure that had earned him decades of respect. The replacement weapon had been inspected twice within minutes. Every measurement matched factory specifications. Fresh ammunition rested beside his elbow. The observers silently convinced themselves that the next round would erase the awkwardness hanging over the range. The command echoed once more. Fire when ready. Rhodes exhaled. The rifle recoiled sharply against his shoulder. Several heads turned toward the electronic display before the sound had completely faded across the valley. 8.5. Another miss. Not dramatic. Not disastrous. But unmistakably outside the standard expected from a man whose reputation had become part of Army folklore. No one spoke. Even the desert breeze seemed reluctant to disturb the stillness. Colonel Marcus Ellison looked toward the armorers. The armorers looked back at the rifle. Neither side possessed another explanation. Rhodes remained kneeling behind the firing point, studying the distant target through the optic for several quiet seconds before slowly engaging the safety. If it isn't the rifle, he said evenly, then the answer is standing somewhere on this range. No accusation filled his voice. Only curiosity. The sentence lingered in the air. A major cleared his throat. Perhaps we should repeat the environmental readings, sir. Already done. Ammunition variance. Within tolerance. Target calibration. Verified. Every suggestion collapsed beneath another confirmed inspection. Several younger soldiers shifted uneasily behind the observation barrier. They had never witnessed senior leaders searching for answers in complete silence. Usually someone stepped forward with confidence, even if that confidence proved misplaced. Today, nobody volunteered, not even the experienced instructors. Across the concrete walkway, Claire Donovan continued collecting discarded cardboard fragments from damaged target frames. She listened without appearing interested. Her pace never changed. One broken staple disappeared into a disposal bucket. A torn corner of paper followed. She brushed loose sand away from the base of a steel stand before lifting another bundle of worn targets onto her shoulder. She passed within 20 feet of the gathered officers. None acknowledged her. One captain absent-mindedly stepped into her path while discussing ballistic coefficients with another instructor. Claire adjusted her course without interrupting the conversation and continued walking toward the maintenance shelter. Then she stopped. Not because someone called her name. Because she had reached the point where remaining silent felt less professional than speaking. She slowly turned. The general still examined the rifle. His support hand rested against the forend exactly as before. The same tiny inward pressure. The same invisible habit. Claire drew a measured breath. Sir. The single word barely rose above the wind. Almost nobody heard it. She tried again, slightly louder. General Rhodes. Several officers immediately looked toward the unexpected voice. A lieutenant frowned. The captain, who had nearly walked into her, stared with visible irritation. Claire stood calmly beside a stack of replacement target frames, one gloved hand still resting on the handle of her broom. "Yes," Rhodes answered, his tone neither welcoming nor dismissive. She remained perfectly respectful. "Sir, may I point out one observation?" Before the general could respond, the captain took one quick step forward. "This inspection is restricted to authorized personnel." Claire didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply answered, "I understand, sir." Then she looked back toward the general. "I believe the rifle is functioning exactly as designed." Another uncomfortable silence settled across the firing line. The captain folded his arms. "So you're saying the problem is the shooter?" Claire met no one's eyes except the general's. "No, sir." She paused just long enough for every person present to lean into the silence. "I believe the problem is only one movement. Real mastery doesn't need a louder voice. It only needs one chance to be heard." No one moved. The sentence lingered over the firing line, suspended between disbelief and protocol. Colonel Marcus Ellison shifted his attention from Claire Donovan to General Rhodes, waiting for the inevitable dismissal. A maintenance worker had just implied she could identify something every instructor, armorer, and senior marksman had overlooked. Under ordinary circumstances, the conversation would have ended immediately. Instead, Rhodes studied her face. There was no arrogance, no hesitation, only the composed expression of someone reporting an observable fact. "What movement?" he asked. Several officers turned sharply toward the general. The captain, who had challenged Claire, stepped forward again. "Sir, with respect, she isn't part of this evaluation." Rhodes raised one hand. The captain stopped speaking. "I asked the question." The range fell silent once more. Claire remained exactly where she stood, neither approaching the firing point nor attempting to touch the rifle. "Sir," she began, "your trigger press is excellent." Rhodes said nothing. "So is your breathing rhythm." A few instructors exchanged puzzled glances. "Your sight picture remains consistent." Still nothing. Claire continued with the same calm cadence. "The rifle isn't drifting because of your firing hand." She lifted one gloved hand only high enough to illustrate the idea, never pointing directly at the general. "It's your support hand." The surrounding officers frowned. Claire slowly rotated her wrist inward by barely a few degrees. Just before recoil, you apply a slight inward steering pressure. The motion was almost invisible. If you allow the forend to rest naturally instead of guiding it, the muzzle will stop tracking left. One instructor instinctively looked back at the recorded target group. Another replayed the general's firing position in his mind. No one interrupted. Rhodes glanced down at his own support hand. "You noticed that from over there?" "Yes, sir." "How long were you watching?" Claire answered without embellishment. "About 3 seconds." The statement drew another wave of silence. 3 seconds. That was all she claimed to need. The captain folded his arms tighter. "General, this is speculation." Claire neither acknowledged him nor defended herself. Rhodes remained thoughtful. "If you're wrong," he said evenly, "nothing changes." She nodded. "Correct, sir. And if you're right, you'll know before the bullet reaches the target." For the first time that morning, the corner of the general's mouth lifted almost imperceptibly. Not amusement. Recognition. He had heard that kind of confidence before, only from people who trusted observation more than ego. Without another word, Rhodes returned to the firing position. He settled behind the rifle again. This time, before placing his support hand beneath the forend, he paused. Claire spoke only once. "Relax the fingers, sir." He loosened them. "Let the rifle balance itself." Another slight adjustment. "Now don't help the shot." The general inhaled. His posture looked almost identical to every previous attempt. Almost. Those who watched closely noticed one tiny difference. The support hand no longer controlled the rifle. It simply supported it. The range officer glanced toward Colonel Ellison. Neither man spoke. Every eye followed the general as he completed one slow respiratory cycle. The trigger broke cleanly. The rifle barked. For a fraction of a second, nobody looked at the target. Every person stared instead at the electronic monitor. The display hesitated. Then the numbers appeared. 10.9. No whispers followed. No explanations. No excuses. Only complete silence, broken at last by General Nathaniel Rhodes quietly lowering the rifle and turning toward the woman still standing beside a broom. His next question carried none of the authority from earlier that morning, only genuine curiosity. Who taught you to see that? The truth rarely announces itself. More often, someone else speaks it first. General Nathaniel Rhodes remained standing beside the firing position, his attention fixed entirely on the quiet woman across the lane. The perfect shot still glowed on the electronic display behind him, but no one was looking at the numbers anymore. Every conversation had disappeared. Even the instructors who normally dissected every detail of a firing sequence found themselves waiting for a single answer. Claire Donovan rested both hands lightly on the broom handle. She neither smiled nor celebrated. "It was taught over time, sir," she replied. Rhodes studied her for another moment. "By whom?" Before Claire could answer, a familiar voice emerged from the rear of the observation group. "By people who expected her to notice things the rest of us couldn't." Heads turned simultaneously. Master Chief Daniel Mercer walked through the assembled officers wearing the subdued combat uniform of Naval Special Warfare. Unlike the polished appearance surrounding the inspection party, his sleeves carried the fading marks of countless field exercises. His pace remained unhurried until he reached the general. He rendered a respectful salute. "Apologies for the interruption, General." Rhodes returned the gesture. "Do you know her?" Mercer looked toward Claire before answering. "Very well, sir." The silence deepened. Colonel Ellison frowned. "You've met our range maintenance technician before?" Mercer gave him a puzzled look. "Maintenance technician?" He glanced back toward Claire as though the description itself required clarification. "No, Colonel." A faint smile crossed his face. "I suspect there's been a misunderstanding." Several officers exchanged uncertain expressions. The captain who had challenged Claire earlier shifted his weight uneasily, but remained silent. Mercer stepped beside the general. "Sir, the woman standing over there is Chief Petty Officer Claire Donovan." The words landed with more force than any rifle report heard that morning. No one spoke. The captain blinked once. A lieutenant quietly lowered the clipboard he had been holding against his chest. Colonel Ellison looked from Mercer to Claire, then back again, searching for evidence that this was some elaborate misunderstanding. Rhodes broke the silence first. "Chief Petty Officer?" "Yes, sir." Mercer nodded. "United States Navy." He continued calmly. "Naval Special Warfare." Several younger soldiers immediately recognized the implication. Others did not. Mercer noticed their confusion. "SEAL teams." The effect was immediate. One instructor inhaled sharply. Another slowly removed his hearing protection without realizing he had done so. The captain who had dismissed Claire moments earlier stared at the broom still resting in her hands, as though it had suddenly become the strangest object on the range. Rhodes never looked away from her. "She's assigned here?" "For a temporary evaluation and instructional exchange, sir." Mercer reached into a document folder carried beneath his arm. "I arrived this morning to finalize the paperwork." He handed a personnel file to the general. Rhodes opened it. The first page carried only a photograph and service identification. The following pages told a very different story. Combat deployments. Advanced sniper qualifications. Precision shooting instructor certifications. Joint training assignments. Commendations earned under circumstances few people ever witnessed. None of them had been mentioned. None displayed. Claire had spent the entire morning pushing a magnetic roller across gravel, gathering empty cartridge cases while decorated officers walked past without asking her name. Rhodes slowly closed the folder. He looked toward Claire again. "You never felt the need to introduce yourself." She answered with the same quiet composure she had shown since sunrise. "My assignment today wasn't to be introduced, sir." A gentle breeze carried another handful of desert dust across the concrete. Claire lowered the broom against the maintenance shed exactly where she had found it. Only then did everyone around her begin to understand that the most experienced precision shooter on the range had never been standing behind the rifle. She had been cleaning beneath it all morning. Respect is never created by a title. It is revealed the moment assumptions fall apart. For several long seconds, no one on the firing line spoke. The desert wind swept across the rows of steel targets, carrying fine dust over the concrete where hundreds of boots had stood throughout the morning. The electronic monitors still displayed the perfect score, but it had become little more than a reminder of something far more important than a well-placed bullet. General Nathaniel Rhodes stepped away from the rifle, not toward his staff, not toward the cameras waiting to document the remainder of the inspection. He walked directly to Claire Donovan. The officers instinctively separated, creating a clear path between them. Claire stood exactly where she had been all morning. Her work gloves remained on. The sleeves of her faded shirt still carried streaks of powder residue. Nothing about her appearance had changed, only the way everyone looked at her. Rhodes stopped a few feet away. "Chief Donovan." "Sir, I owe you an apology." The words were spoken plainly, without ceremony or hesitation. "I walked onto this range believing I understood everyone standing on it." He glanced briefly toward the broom resting against the maintenance shed. "I was mistaken." Claire met his eyes with the same calm expression she had carried since sunrise. "No apology is necessary, sir." "I disagree." Rhodes turned toward the assembled officers. His voice carried easily across the firing lanes. "Every leader in uniform should remember what happened here today." The crowd grew even quieter. "We inspected rifles." He paused. "We inspected optics." Another pause. "We questioned ammunition." His gaze moved slowly across the formation. But almost none of us thought to ask the simplest question. He looked back at Claire. "Who is she?" No one answered. No one needed to. Colonel Marcus Ellison stepped forward first. He extended his hand. "Chief Donovan, thank you." The captain who had challenged her only minutes earlier followed immediately afterward. "I judged the uniform you were wearing instead of the experience behind it." Claire accepted the handshake without triumph. "We all make quick assessments, Captain. I won't make that one again." Master Chief Daniel Mercer watched the exchange quietly before giving Claire a small nod that required no words. Professional respect had never depended on public recognition. The inspection resumed, but not as originally planned. Instead of continuing the scheduled demonstration, General Rhodes requested that every marksmanship instructor gather around Lane 7. For the next hour, Claire explained the fundamentals of natural rifle balance, subtle pressure control, and disciplined observation. She spoke with patience, never mentioning her deployments, qualifications, or accomplishments unless someone asked a direct technical question. The lesson remained focused on principles rather than personalities. By the time the session concluded, notebooks were filled with diagrams and annotations. Even seasoned instructors admitted they had learned something new. As the afternoon sun drifted lower over the mountains, vehicles prepared to depart. Rhodes paused beside Claire one final time. "Chief Donovan." "Sir." "The Army invited a maintenance worker to today's inspection." A faint smile crossed his face. "It leaves having been instructed by a Navy SEAL." Claire allowed herself the smallest smile in return. "Good shooting is a skill anyone can improve, sir." The general nodded thoughtfully before stepping into his vehicle. As the convoy disappeared beyond the outer gate, the range gradually returned to its ordinary rhythm. New recruits collected magazines. Instructors reset targets. Empty cartridge cases scattered across the gravel once again. Claire picked up the magnetic roller exactly where she had left it. Without fanfare, she resumed gathering brass beneath the quiet evening sky. Nothing about her work appeared extraordinary, except that everyone who passed her now understood a lesson no classroom could have taught. The strongest soldiers never demand respect. They earn it so completely that, once the truth is seen, no one ever mistakes them again. People rarely remember the exact score on the target. They remember the moment their opinion changed forever. 3 days later, Fort Hawthorne looked exactly as it always had. Morning formations assembled beneath the pale desert sky. Transport vehicles crossed the compound in steady intervals. Instructors checked attendance before another cycle of qualifications began. Fresh targets replaced those destroyed during previous exercises, and the sharp rhythm of controlled gunfire once again echoed across the surrounding hills. Only one thing had changed. This time, every soldier who walked onto the range noticed the woman already working there. Some greeted her with a respectful nod. Others offered a quiet, "Good morning, Chief." Claire Donovan answered each greeting with the same simple courtesy, never encouraging attention and never avoiding it. Recognition had altered the behavior of everyone around her, but it had not altered her own. She still arrived before sunrise. She still inspected every firing lane herself. She still picked up spent brass whenever she found it. To Claire, no task became less important simply because someone else considered it ordinary. Near the instructor platform, a young private hesitated before approaching her. "Chief, may I ask you something?" She looked up from adjusting a target stand. "Of course. Why were you cleaning the range yourself?" Claire tightened the final bolt before answering. Because the range needed cleaning. The private smiled uncertainly. I thought someone with your experience would have people doing that for you. She brushed a little dust from her gloves. If a job supports the mission, it deserves to be done well. The young soldier nodded slowly. He understood far more than the words alone. Later that afternoon, General Nathaniel Rhodes' official inspection report reached the installation commander. The document contained pages of observations covering equipment readiness, safety procedures, maintenance standards, and training effectiveness. One paragraph, however, was quietly circulated among senior leaders. It read, "Professional excellence is not always displayed through rank, appearance, or assignment. Leaders must evaluate people by demonstrated competence rather than assumption. The strongest contributors are often the least interested in announcing themselves." No names were highlighted. None were necessary. The lesson belonged to everyone who read it. Months afterward, instructors still referenced that inspection during new personnel orientations. Not because a general had fired an imperfect group, not because a Navy SEAL had corrected his technique, but because every person present had witnessed what genuine professionalism looked like. It spoke respectfully. It waited patiently. It offered help without seeking recognition. And once its value became undeniable, it quietly returned to work. As evening settled over Fort Hawthorne, the firing line finally grew still. The last shooters departed. The final target was removed. Golden light stretched across the empty lanes where thousands of rounds had been fired over the years. Claire rolled the magnetic collector one final time across the gravel, listening to the familiar sound of brass gathering beneath it. She paused for only a moment to look toward the distant mountains glowing beneath the setting sun. Then she continued forward with the same measured stride that had begun the story. No audience, no applause, no headlines. Only another mission completed with discipline and humility. Long after the convoy had disappeared and the conversations had faded, the most enduring mark left on Fort Hawthorne was not a perfect shot through the center of a target. It was a simple reminder carried by everyone who had stood on that range. Never measure a soldier by the task in front of them. Measure them by the character they bring to every task, whether the world is watching or not. Because true respect is never demanded. It is earned, one quiet action at a time.